I wanted to ask a follow-up question related to what you've just said now. And I mean, you've already kind of answered it just towards the end now. And this might be preempting a lot of the conversation later, which is about, Maradona as potentially a nationalist figure. But I first want to talk about him rather as a working class icon, which is to say that a lot of footballers are generally from working class backgrounds, whether or not they're footballers that are coming from a different part of the world and playing in another part of the world. Working class identity is central in a lot of cases to being a footballer, as far as explaining your background story, how you came to be the successful individual that you eventually become. And what I've wondered is what was so special about Maradona? Because was he the trailblazer? Was he the person who actually paved the way for being of working class origins, being so central to your identity as a footballer? Or what was it that he did that made him stand out, that made him become this working class icon, that made working class people across the world, as you were saying just now, Pablo, and even Tony was alluding to it earlier, that despite the riches that they eventually accumulated at some point in their lives, were people that, no matter which working class community you went to, whether it's a township here in South Africa, a village in Tanzania, a favela in South America, anywhere in the world, they looked at Maradona and they said, he is one of us. How did that happen?
Well, I think what Maradona did is that he never shied away from those origins, and also he always embraced them. Because there were other South Americans playing in Europe before, even Argentinians. There was, for example, Osvaldo Ardiles and Ricardo Villa played for Tottenham in the 80s. But they were like middle class Argentinians, and they never like emphasized their origins. They just their narrative they told about themselves was like they were the first wave of South Americans making it big in the European leagues. Well, Maradona was always talking about his humble origins. He was always talking about the people from his neighborhood. He was always talking about the humble origins of his parents. And he was always, with his life, he was also living the life that he was preaching, to put it somehow in his narrative, because he was always associating with those kind of people. He was never shying away from like meeting poor people in Napoli, and not just for like a charity event or something like most footballers would do now, but he would like befriend people in working class positions in Napoli. So he would talk to, I don't know, the doorman at the stadium and befriend him and help him if his family needed something. And I think that's why his persona as a working class man continued, because he made it a point of his life to be one. He wasn't just one. He obviously was born working class, but he also tried to continue that association throughout his life.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I love this. I think this is getting to something really important, and something that probably, people of the left looking at football today feel a great sense of disappointment and nostalgia, because what Maradona represents, I think, is like, I don't think it's correct to imagine him as like a political activist or like as a politician, that we're going to locate on a spectrum somewhere. Is he a social democrat? Is he a communist or whatever? Because it's not, he's a rebel. He's a working class rebel who, comes up in a system that's run by a dictatorship, right? Videla's dictatorship. That's when he's cutting his teeth. He's got to go he's got to go to the military for national service in his early days as a player. And he's constantly rebelling against this kind of system, the structure of that subordinates the poor, that rigs the system against the poor. and he's doing things his own way. He's disrupting. He's sticking it to the bosses. He's going up to Juve and he's beating the Agnellis. Like that, that message for Napoli. It's like the owners of Fiat and their club, and Maradona sticking it to them. And River Plate is the bourgeois club in Buenos Aires, and he's sticking it to them. So there's that, identification with that symbol. But now, anybody who becomes a professional footballer is instantly like warp speed upwardly mobile. Like suddenly they are fabulously rich compared with where they've come from. And so you think there's a choice. And, like, do they identify with the class to which they're now getting access and, being invited into because they suddenly have millions of dollars? Or do they maintain that sense of their origins and the solidarity? In particular, that connection with that community that they're lucky enough to have escaped because of their abilities as a footballer, but nonetheless remain connected with. And I do think we'd probably all agree that today you look at football and you're like, man, like, is Marcus Rashford as good as it gets?
I was going to ask about him. I was going to ask about him.
I mean, that's great, but that's parity. Marcus Rashford is not a disruptor in the way that Maradona was. He's not challenging the power structure. He's
a member of the British Empire.
Yeah, exactly. He's a lovely chap, and he plays for a crap club. But but look at all the Brazilians, and you're like, oh my God, to a man, they support Bolsonaro, right? What happened to Socrates and the spirit of, you're a working class footballer for the working class? Throwing that out for you.
No, I'm always struck when you look on Instagram, for example. I used to have this idea that I'll do like a study of kind of footballers and their Instagram accounts. And for a minute, I just followed African footballers. And essentially what they do is they mostly either thank God or Allah. They talk about their cars. They pose in some clothes, and they're standing in a gated community. Like and they'll put like a scripture up, or they'll put a verse from the Quran. If they're political, they usually pose in the outfit of whichever ruling party is running a country. So particularly South African ones, if they retired, you'll see them prancing around in ANC outfits. So that's kind of, I don't think there's like a South African footballer, just are the ones that I sort of know best, who's actually got dressed, I would suppose, in like an EFF outfit. Or, this is the Economic Freedom Front, which is sort of radical party that thinks it's like a Chavistas. But you never see that kind of thing among footballers.